of arguments about the setback levy. The setback levy, of course, is the preferred plan simply due to economics, but there were questions about the safety of its construction, and that it's whether or not, because of its geological underlayment, would that actually provide flood protection. The other safety issue that was brought up earlier was the fact that would there be human incursions? Would there be people that were homeless that would be living between the inner levee areas? And what about the crime that might be afforded by this sheltered area? It's not just an environmental habitat. And then lastly, as far as an environment is concerned, I realized later that the inner levee area, which is coveted by the state for funding as an environmental resource, actually would, in fact, for a greater part of the year, be inundated with water, or in fact flooded. And if you consider this situation, you're creating a tremendous habitat for mosquitoes. So now you need reassurance, and of course the residents of the largely populated area of West Sacramento that are involved and would be affected by this project need reassurance that, in fact, that there would be a flood mosquito control abatement project involved in this. And along with mosquitoes vector West Nile virus, so there's also that chance that you might be increasing the disease element of such a construction. All right, and with that, I thank you for this opportunity. And
Wilson Wyatt would like to speak on item number 2.
President Denton and members of the board, good morning and Happy New Year to you. I did want to speak on item number 2. I submitted 2 letters. One is on your agenda item number 6, and I'd like to speak on that when it comes up also. And I'd also like to speak on agenda item number 8. But what I wanted to say under public comment was I wanted to note that President Denton has been kind enough to respond to the letter that I sent in December. And the first letter that I gave the clerk for you is my response to his response. And probably Mr. Nevis and Mr. Denton will come up with a response to my response to his response. But one of the I wanted to mention one very important issue that's treated in both Mr. Denton's letter and my letter, and that is the option that I don't think you've looked at closely enough, and that is the option of an adjacent levee with a combination seepage berm and partially penetrating cutoff wall in segment F. One of the things in my letter is an attachment from Mark Gilbert, our consultant, who indicates that that would be a solution that would be as effective as what is being proposed in segment F, that being a setback levee, and it would greatly lessen the impacts on private property. President Denton, you mentioned in your letter that staff is always open and ready to meet with us, and staff has been very accommodating in meeting with us. We had a long meeting in August on technical issues, but I think, as you understand, the way the process functions is you make the decisions and staff carries it out, and the direction comes from the top down, which is the way it should be. So what I'm going to be suggesting to staff is a meeting that you might be present at, along with staff, where our consultant can discuss with you the proposal that I've outlined in my letter, which again it involves an adjacent levee instead of a setback levee. Thanks again for your prompt response to my letter, and I would like, again, I'd like to speak on those other items I mentioned, agenda item 6 and agenda item 8. Thank you.
Okay, the approval of the December the 13th, 2012 minutes.
Make a motion to accept as mailed. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Review of our monthly year-to-date revenue and expense.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This cash flow report summarizes receipts and expenditures for the month of November 2012. Expenditures for September were indicated at $943,000 thereabouts. There is a $188,000 charge on the CHP Academy project, and $144,000 of that will come back in the following month. So the actual expenditures will probably turn out for this month will end up being around $800,000. And the largest expenditures, of course, were on the Southport project at about $620,000. There were no revenues booked for November. We're expecting the first assessment payment sometime between the 15th and 20th of this month, and I'll report on that at a later date. Between last month and this month, we did receive $2.5 million in true-up in the state fund account. I'm reporting that kind of out of sequence because this is for November, and those accounts, those payments show up in December, but that the lag in the true-up kind of drags down our cash position, so I like to report it a little bit in advance so it gives you a more accurate picture of our cash on hand. As they catch up with us and things start to merge, I'll report them in the same month at the same time. So our ending position for the month is somewhere around $9 million, give or take, you know, the lag in processing. And we're expecting some additional true-up payments in the near future from the state. And that's pretty much the summary at this time.
No question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Presentation by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. My name is Alicia Kirchner, and I am with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I am chief of our planning division here in the Sacramento District Office, and we are working together with you in the state of California on what we call a general reevaluation report that is investigating further flood risk reduction measures for the West Sacramento area. So today I'm going to provide an overview as to where we are with the status of that study and those efforts. Also touch on initially the other efforts that we are undertaking together for the greater Sacramento, West Sacramento area. So I will mention the status of the EIPs that you've been implementing, our role in those, also talk about some recent construction activities, and then focus on the general reevaluation report status. We have had some changes in our procedures within the Corps in how we conduct planning studies, like the general reevaluation report. And so I'm also today going to provide an overview as to what those changes are nationwide to our program and how we do planning studies, and more specifically what that means to the West Sacramento general reevaluation report. And I will touch upon our schedule and budget for the remaining investigation, sort of the next steps, what comes next, and then I'll touch upon the status of your initial projects, your early implementation projects, with regards to potential federal crediting for some of that work or that work in the future. So the early implementation projects, your early implementation projects, the top three, as you know, have been completed, constructed by you: the I Street Bridge, the CHP Academy, and the river sites. The Corps' role as part of that was to work with you on securing permission from the Corps for you to be able to modify that existing federal levy. That has happened. We are working with you in a similar fashion now on the Southport site, your early implementation project work that you're developing there. We're coordinating both with our general reevaluation report team as well as our 408 team in the Sacramento District Office. So I don't feel that there are any issues on our part with regards to that now. I think we have, especially now in 2013, a pretty well-established 408 process for approvals. We've learned a lot as an agency on some of the prior 408 approvals. West Sacs was a big part of that with some of the earlier 408s, and I'm seeing some really some improvements in terms of our coordination. Processing vertically through our division and our headquarters offices still takes some time, and so we'll just encourage you to continue working with us as you have been. With any advanced information you can give us on the Southport EIP, that'll be really helpful in us being able to smooth the way towards hopefully securing that permission for modification to that levee as well. With regards to the West Sacramento project repair sites, the slips that had occurred or the distress that we had seen after the 2006 high water event, the construction has been complete. Those repairs were complete in 2009 and in 2011, so that work is done for us. We've turned that over to you. With regards to our most recent construction work, Sacramento River Bank Protection Project at River Mile 57.2, that work is fundamentally complete. We're looking at it to make sure it's acceptable and meets our rules and criteria, but the flood protection facility is in place, the setback levee is in place and can function. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and roll into the update on the general reevaluation report. Last year was a pretty big year for not just the work we've been doing together on the general reevaluation report, but within the Corps in our overall planning, national planning program. As I said, we had some pretty big changes in our guidance. And a lot of what we did last year was figure out how to adjust our ongoing investigations to meet this new guidance and direction. We're very excited about the new guidance, and so far, in general, our non-federal sponsors nationwide have been fairly excited about it because it's about getting our studies done more quickly, getting to actionable decisions more quickly, more cost effectively, and just in a much more succinct fashion. So we're finding that there's a lot of positives in it, and we've taken the good associated with that guidance and applied it to the West Sac general reevaluation process. The guidance came out for Corps headquarters, and I'll refer to it as planning modernization guidance, in February of 2012, right in the middle of our ongoing investigation. In March of 2012, we hit a key milestone in the traditional pre-existing Corps process. We call it a feasibility scoping meeting. I'll talk about that a little bit, but fundamentally, that's where we, within the Corps, get a vertical buy-in up to our headquarters office that we have done some of our early planning steps appropriately and that they can agree with them. We define what we call the future without project condition, which is just that. What would the existing and continued flood risk in the West Sacramento area be in absence of additional federal work? So we portray that, and that becomes the very key baseline against which we measure and evaluate alternative plans, which is the phase that we're in now. So we were able to obtain from our Corps headquarters that agreement in March that we had done the appropriate amount of work. After the March milestone is when we really set about rescoping our study effort in accordance with our new guidance. And I will talk about some of the details of the guidance and show how that was thought through as part of the general reevaluation report. We did a lot of that last summer, and because it is an evolving process and we need to make sure that we are applying the new guidance correctly and appropriately, we had a vertical in-progress review with our headquarters, and your team participated in that as well as the state of California in July last summer of 2012. And we got additional validation that we were rescoping the study in accordance with the new guidance, and we were on target in doing that. So that was a good indication. So a bit on our planning modernization guidance and what it really is doing to the Corps' planning program overall. Again, the guidance came to us in February of last year, and it's really about a few fundamental things. Bottom line is getting to an actionable decision more quickly, and it's about identifying earlier in our study process whether there's strong indication of federal interest in a project. In the past, our studies have taken longer. There's reasons for that, but it's a cost-shared phase. The study process is a cost-shared phase, and we believe that we can get to an earlier indication of federal interest so that all the partners can make informed decisions as to whether or not we continue to proceed in an investigation or if there needs to be a different way forward for everyone. This study, the General Reevaluation Report, was able to satisfy that test of early indication of federal interest last March. So that's why that milestone was key for us. It wasn't a hard test to demonstrate for this community because it's a large established city. that definitely has a risk of flooding. So we were able to make that case. So that's an important piece to it. But that's one of the imperatives as part of the new planning modernization process. We are also trying to make sure that our national study portfolio is a strong, healthy, viable study portfolio, and that the studies that are a part and continue to be a part of the Corps' national study portfolio have met that test of potential federal interest, and that we're not continuing to invest nationwide in studies where it just doesn't look like there's going to be a call for federal participation in a project. So we've taken what was over 600 studies nationwide and culled that down to about 280-ish studies currently that are still active studies in our portfolio. So good news is that the WSAC Journal Reevaluation Report is still an active, viable investigation within the Corps. That means that we've got more resources nationwide to invest in those remaining studies, and we're able to make sure that we're directing the resources as appropriate. So that's funding, that's vertical resources, which we really do struggle with, and we did struggle with getting the attention of our headquarters reviewers some last year amidst all of this change and the number of studies that they were called on to look at last year. We're in that mix, and we're surviving that screening process without question. So that's good news for us. We're also really taking another look at, part of a feasibility study or general reevaluation report with the Corps is identifying the plan that meets federal criteria. We say maximizes net benefits from a national perspective. But we recognize that that's not necessarily the plan that is implementable at the local level. And so we have, we've always had allowances for something we call a locally preferred plan that we could recommend potentially be implemented instead of the federal plan. The planning modernization process reaffirms that that is out there. It acknowledges that there are plans underway by others, by states. Certainly the state of California has a Central Valley Flood Protection Plan that we can take into consideration, and the local planning efforts. It's about looking to work that's been done by others, plans and visions that have been laid out by others, and really relying to a greater extent than we have in the past on those plans. There's a lot of figuring out what that really looks like in our future still, but the intention, the stated intention as part of planning modernization is that we're really looking to existing information, work done by others. In a situation where, like we have in West Sacramento, where you've got so much work you're doing as part of your EIP program, there's really some opportunities there that lend itself towards more efficiently and effectively completing the general reevaluation report. So we're excited about that. Level of detail and managing uncertainty associated with level of detail. And when I talk about detail, I mean engineering information, environmental information, economic information. This is typically why our studies have become so complicated in past years, is because we're trying to satisfy with a high degree of certainty a lot of engineering and environmental and economic questions. What we're trying to do now is really step back and ask ourselves, what are the most critical pieces of information that we need to have to make good investment decisions without going beyond that and getting additional information, which we have thought was essential, but we're really going back and looking at what's truly essential. It's about getting back to just some critical thinking as part of planning a study, as opposed to design or construction, where you definitely have to have that more detailed information. This has really been the bulk of what we've spent our time doing as we've adjusted our study to this planning modernization direction. It's really a lot of critical thinking, looking at the existing information that's out there, the work that's being done by others, and saying what information is missing that we must have to be able to make sound investment decisions. Ensuring vertical integration is another fundamental premise of planning modernization. It's about getting earlier engagement from Corps headquarters, those ultimate decision makers, so that they can see the progress of a study earlier in the development of the study. It's a challenge for us right now because there's so many investigations that they're looking at, as I've said, but we think that this ultimately is going to lend itself towards having confidence sooner that we know where we're going in terms of making a recommendation for federal participation in a project. If you've heard anything about planning modernization at all, and some of you may have, there is a nickname for it. We call it 3x3x3. And that's not actually a fully descriptive nickname because there's a fourth 3, but I don't think that sounded as good. So what I guess, shortly stated goals of planning modernization are: studies are to take no more than $3 million, cost no more than $3 million, take no more than 3 years. They will engage 3 levels of vertical coordination. So that's within the Corps, that's the district, our regional headquarters at South Pacific Division in San Francisco, and then our national headquarters in Washington, D.C. There's an additional sort of unspoken requirement that's becoming part of the expectation, and that is that our documentation, which had been feet long in terms of supporting engineering, environmental, economic information, is really, our target now is about 100 pages, a 3-inch binder. We are encouraged to write more succinctly, keep more of that background supporting technical information in our office files. So we are definitely struggling with that as an agency, but we're going to continue to make some headways on it, and we have seen some successes. It's really mostly comes down to calibrating what reviewers are expecting to see. And so that's going to be a tough one for us, but we do believe that we need to do good report writing for all decision makers in the public to understand what we're proposing. So what's different? Again, this is about getting to decisions earlier in the process, and with that vertical engagement, making sure that when we're engaging with our headquarters more frequently, that we're making decisions. We're going into these vertical engagement sessions, showing what we've done and making decisions as to what comes next. So it's about not leaving all of the decisions to the end of the investigation, but integrating decision-making process throughout. That's really key, and we did some of that last year, both in March and again in July. And we're actually getting ready to do some more of that next month in February. I'll talk about that in a minute. Again, it's about managing risk and uncertainty associated with the level of detail, and identifying the information that we have, assessing its completeness, identifying what we don't have, and what it means to not have certain types of information, making informed decisions about whether or not we need to have that information. And sometimes it's about making a recommendation, but qualifying it and explaining what the risk is associated with that decision or uncertainties associated with that decision. So we're continuing to work on that, but we're moving as an agency, at least in the planning program, to become more comfortable with higher degrees of uncertainty, as long as it's transparent and the partners all understand and make the decisions together. And we're advocating doing more writing earlier in the process. What's not different is we're still relying on sound engineering, sound environmental information, sound economic information. You can still have high quality information even if it's not as detailed. That element of quality is attained by acknowledging the uncertainty associated with the information or risk associated with the information. We're still complying with all the laws and regulations that we are required to comply with, and we're still actively engaging the public as part of our project development process. So again, getting studies done more quickly, at less cost, more cost effectively, high quality decision documents that we can have confidence in as partners, acknowledging the risk and uncertainty, and nationwide, Congress will have more confidence in the Corps' planning study portfolio because they know that we've introduced this additional discipline into it and that the active studies that are underway are worth investing in. This is the timeline for both our generic new process. At the top, we have typed in some of the key dates for the West Sacramento General Reevaluation Report. So that first milestone is really about getting understanding on the conditions in the study area and the potential plans that we can look at to resolve issues in the study area. We got vetting and agreement on that in March of last year. That's that milestone number 1. Our next milestone that we're gearing up for is in August of this year. We have a meeting with headquarters in February where we're going to preview to them the alternatives analysis work that we have done and what information we know about our alternatives so far, get some feedback, making sure that we're on the right track to mitigate the risk of going into the August decision milestone just to mitigate the chance that something might be rejected or we get told we didn't quite do a full enough job. So this is our way of handling that. We have, after what we call the tentatively selected plan milestone. So that's the milestone where we actually identify this is the plan that we plan to recommend to Congress, subject to review of the draft environmental document, draft and general reevaluation report. After that public and agency review occurs, and the non-federal partners go through their deliberation process in terms of what they can formally endorse, we would go ahead and declare that we have identified the plan that we're going to recommend to Congress. That's the Milestone 3. That's after public and agency review of the draft reports has occurred and is completed. We then go into our internal process where we finalize our report through our headquarters. Our commanding general at headquarters endorses it, and it goes on to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. And that is the chief's report that is sent to her office. So those are the major milestones. As you can see, the 36 months timeline across the top is reflective of planning modernization, the intention that we do things in 3 years. I will tell you that it's not acceptable within the Corps to have anything that goes beyond 3 years or beyond $3 million without explicit permission from our Deputy Commanding General in Washington. That's hard to get, and no one wants to have to ask for it. So we are definitely highly motivated to keep within those parameters. We'd have to have compelling reason not to, that we would all agree with. So the West Sacramento General Reevaluation Report, we are evaluating alternative plans. Of course, and this is a quick look at what those plans are. Some of this might be a little new to you. I don't believe we've presented this information to the board. It is the subject that we are working on with your staff now, and we'll be working very closely on, continue to work closely on over the next few months as we ramp up to that August milestone, where we want to be prepared to identify a tentatively selected plan. Of course, no action is the default recommendation of the Corps until we establish federal interest in a plan. That becomes then the default recommendation, and then we talk about local preferences. So one alternative is fundamentally repairing existing levees. It pretty much includes some kind of repair to the levees that are currently in place surrounding both basins, either fixing them in place or possibly a setback levee. It becomes a cost-effectiveness analysis on a site-by-site basis as to which is most cost-effective to implement. That's some of the work that the team's been looking at now. They are also looking at possible placement of a closure structure, along the deepwater ship channel well, I'll show a map and then you'll see where, which could alleviate the need for some of the levee repairs. I have a graphic that shows levee repairs without such a closure, and the reduction in levee repairs that would be necessary if such a closure were to be put in place. So this is something that we're continuing to explore and working with your office on. We're also looking at an alternative to widen the Sacramento bypass. That would eliminate the need to potentially raise levees along the Sacramento River downstream. It does not eliminate the need to do the seepage and stability work on the levees on the non-Sacramento River levees, the rest of the levees. We could also include the closure for the Deepwater Ship Channel in this alternative as well. That seems to be something that could be included with any alternative if we decide that makes sense. We are also looking at a somewhat new idea, which is possible construction of a diversion structure in the Sacramento River about at I Street. The idea there is you route more water up through the Sacramento bypass into the bypass system. This is not something that's been looked at much at all. We've been working with interagency collaboration, trying to understand, could something like that be designed? Could it be constructed? What would the impacts and costs associated with that be? What would a timeline for implementing that be? And there are a lot of unknowns. It's something that possibly could be done theoretically. Implementation of something like that is a whole different story. So it is an alternative under consideration in the General Reevaluation Report. Right now, indication of federal interest appears to be in repairing, the first alternative, repairing levees, the fix-in-place or setback levees. It is possible widening the Sacramento bypass could pencil out for federal interest. We're concerned about the I Street diversion structure because of timeline for implementation. We just think it's appearing to be something that would take much longer to implement than either of the other two plans. And with our objective of being reducing flood risk to the city sooner than later, that becomes very important in our decision-making criteria. So I'd ask you to stay tuned on the continuing evaluation and comparison of these alternative plans. We'll keep working with your staff as well as the state of California and keep you posted on the status. This is just a map showing the levees that would need additional work. And this is specifically to draw the contrast as to what levees we might be able to avoid doing work on if we were to introduce a closure structure in the deepwater ship channel that could help control flows in the channel. Oop. I need to go back. Oh. I'm not sure I'm driving. Thank you. Oh. That's fine, thank you. So somewhat of a reduction in terms of levee work, and we're really trying to understand the costs and comparative costs between these two plans to see how viable it looks. This is a look at our remaining schedule milestone dates. Again, we have an in-progress review meeting with the partners and Corps headquarters in just a few weeks, early February, where we will talk to them about what we've done in terms of alternatives evaluation and where we think federal interest is going. We will be looking to the state and city of West Sacramento to indicate to us where you think your local preference is from our array of alternative plans. And we then move into our tentatively selected plan milestone, that milestone number 2, in August this summer, where we indicate our tentative recommended plan. We get permission to go to finalize our reports to put the draft GRR, draft environmental document, on the street for public and agency review. Meanwhile, we're doing more detailed analysis on that tentatively selected plan. So that is reflective of planning modernization. We try to hold off doing the higher level design work on the alternative. We don't try not to do that on the alternative plans. We're doing that on that tentatively selected plan. After public and agency review of the draft is complete, we will work towards finalizing the recommendation for the project out of the Sacramento District Office and send it on its way for approvals up through higher Corps headquarters and on its way to the Assistant Secretary of the Army and ultimately to the Congress, making a recommendation for project authorization. A quick look at our study budget. Before planning modernization and our rescoping efforts, the study cost estimate was just over $10 million. The study cost is now estimated to be $6.85 million. This includes expended costs from prior years. So we can't go back and rescope what's already been completed, but we can rescope our balance to complete. We have about a $3 million cost estimate to complete. Because we were an ongoing study before planning modernization, that's considered acceptable within the Corps. And your contributions have been a combination of, I think, cash and in-kind services. And we have a number of in-kind services. Those are things that you have produced, technical products you have produced and contributed towards the investigation that we can credit towards your share of the cost of the general reevaluation report. Oops. I'm sorry, I need to go back. Now, a quick look at potential credit for work that you have accomplished as part of your EIP program projects. To recap it, the I-Street work is covered under an authorization for potential receipt of credit. The credit authority is referred to as Section 104, and so that is being evaluated as part of the general reevaluation report, and we have full authority to make a recommendation about the specific value of credit after we finish the study. So that's on track. The Southport EIP, we are working with you as part of that EIP to align it so that it can also be considered for receipt of credit or potential credit. And that is a different credit authority. We refer to that as 221. And I don't see issues associated with us processing that as long as we keep working closely together to make sure we're meeting each other's timelines so that we can line you up for potential credit for that work. The CHP and the river sites are not covered under a credit authority currently. They kind of fell in between these two credit authorities and a window of opportunity. And so I just want to, I know this is an item of concern for the city. It's a concern for the partners overall. We'll continue to advise on that to the extent that we can, but I do want to be clear that it's currently not covered by a potential credit authority. And with that, I would just ask if you have any questions.
A lot to digest.
Let me start out with one question. In your report, you talked about the setback levies versus the fix-in-place levies, and you mentioned that the criteria was cost-effectiveness. Do you also analyze at the same time as the engineering data and what is really best for the city of West Sacramento? What is the best fix, regardless of the costs, the truly best fix?
I would say yes, we do, and it gets worked into that cost-effective analysis. In listening to what your concerns are on any particular location, we can come to understand what the basis for that concern is, and usually there's a cost associated with that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's such a high cost that we screen things out as you don't even think about them because they're so, it's just something you wouldn't really think to do. But it goes into our analysis. So it's best for core process if we can get everything we can into that cost-benefit analysis. And if you're helping to identify your concerns, you're helping to make sure that the true cost is identified. And that goes into the decision-making process. So we are attempting to do that.
Do you make a report on that? Do you make a report on that to the city?
Could I make a report on that to the city? Yes. On the cost-effectiveness analysis?
Yes, for the Southport area.
Okay. I'm not prepared to do that right now, but we could make arrangements to do that.
I think that'd be helpful for us.
If you're looking for sort of a detailed breakdown of yes. Location, setback versus fixed in place, and the thinking that goes into which. Okay. Yeah, we can come back to you with that.
Thank you. Good report.
I got a few questions.
Tom's got some questions.
Hi.
Going back to you were showing the some of your alternatives, your widening of the Sacramento bypass and that possible I Street diversion or whatever you called it. Is that also being studied as part of the Sacramento GRR?
For the American River Common Features,
yes.
Sacramento General Reevaluation Report, yes. We have 2 alternative plans that are common to West Sacramento GRR and Common Features GRR because we're looking to see if there are synergies if both projects align to implement the same project. Okay. And I would say we've got preliminary information. That's the subject of a lot of partnering discussions of which the city is included in. And that's really what the focus becomes over the next weeks and months, is understanding that information.
If they're decided to be viable, how do you choose which project that they get implemented under or constructed under?
I think that if widening of the bypass or the I Street or the I Street diversion structure were to ultimately be selected for implementation, it would probably be a coordinated regional project, and we would go through a cost allocation process to identify which city benefited to which degree and allocate the costs in accordance with the benefits. It's not an exercise that we have done yet in the Corps on a multi-project, project-to-project standpoint. It is a methodology that we have that we can use within an investigation. So we're kind of getting into uncharted territory, but we do have a way we think we can approach it that will be very transparent to all the partners involved as we walk through that, if that happens.
And can stay within the timelines that you guys have.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that by widening the Sacramento bypass or the I Street diversion, it could reduce the necessity for raising the levees farther south of the river, right, on the Sacramento River?
Widening the Sacramento bypass could remove the need to widen the levees on the Sacramento River to the south, the I Street diversion structure could go further and reduce the need to do some seepage and stability work as well.
Okay. Are we talking about our Southport implementation project levies, or are you talking even farther south?
I'm going to ask my team as to how far down the effect goes if we know hydraulically.
Right now, we're just looking at the Southport levees and the levees along Sacramento River in the northeast too. But if there would be some effects downstream of that, but they're not really part of our project. I don't have the exact hydraulic information on that. But we're looking specifically both for the American River Common features like the pocket area downtown Sacramento.
Right. Because we're in the process of, heading towards 65% design, and I assume our team is working under the auspices of the current hydraulics that will dictate a certain height. If you folks come along and determine that, some of these other features make more sense, that could change our design. Is that correct? And how do we, it changes our costs, a lot of,
It could affect. It could affect ultimately how much of the work you undertake is creditable.
Because it lowers the 100-year threshold, right?
Yeah. So we'll continue working with your team on the specifics of that. I think because our tentative selective plan milestone is in August, I think we're going to know in the next few months pretty clearly what we're aligning to recommend as partners. As part of that, we'll be identifying what that means to your EIP. And it probably comes down to informed decision-making on your part with regards to your EIP. I don't want to hazard a guess as to how much of an impact it could or couldn't have, maybe significant, maybe not significant. But we do need to continue to be aware of that concern and work it. Okay.
And then finally on the crediting issue, I'm glad you brought that up and showed it to us. We went forward with the 2 EIP projects a couple years ago, anticipating, being able to be credited in that 104 program. And I guess the best word is we were blindsided by the fact that, there was a policy decision to, terminate those types of credits. Going forward now, and, this GRR process, what point does the GRR have to reach that we have a guarantee that our Southport implementation project will be eligible for federal reimbursements once the GRR is authorized or accepted?
The key milestone for managing the risk or reducing the risk that you'll implement something that ultimately isn't credible is our draft report milestone. That is the trigger for the Secretary to issue what we call consideration of credit, approval to have consideration of credit. That's your trigger to go ahead and implement your project. There is no assurance that all the work you're doing would ultimately be deemed creditable. We're minimizing the risk of what you're doing, the risk that much of what you do won't be considered creditable by waiting to that draft report milestone now. But we will not know for certain what amount is actually creditable until the end of the general reevaluation report and a follow-on credit determination document. So that general reevaluation report will identify the in general terms, what's creditable. Then we'll do an auditing type report that identifies the exact dollar amount.
Those type of determinations sound technical to me, right? What about policy-wise? Can we get in the same predicament we just got into in that we go forward and there's a policy decision that no, the milestone shouldn't have been the draft report. It should have been, the final report.
I can't predict the future fully. And there always is a chance that policy can evolve. I would imagine, with our current guidance does clearly state contingent on release of the draft report, the draft decision document, in this case, the general reevaluation report. That development of that guidance took a long time, and a lot of thought was put into that in Washington, a lot of deliberation. I don't anticipate that it will change by August or by December of this year. If I get an indication that something might be changing, I will certainly talk to your office.
Okay, well, please work with us. I mean, it's our intention to move forward with this project to protect this community, but we can't jeopardize not being able to fund the rest of the project going forward after your GRR if we do not get reimbursement. That's it.
One more question, Bill, if I can. As you talked about the possibility of taking water north from Ice Street Bridge or widening the Deepwater Channel, have the studies been done? Well, I guess they're not done yet, but has at least the issues been raised as far as reciprocal effects? Now, I realize that does a lot for Sacramento, but at the same time, logic says that you're going to have more water going down the bypass and out into the causeway. And that affects our levees because, number one, you have higher water levels, and number two, the water will be there longer. And so you have, different issues that may rise. And I just wanted to make sure that we understand that those kinds of things are, and are there any other things we should be doing to our levee system on the west side of our city so that those things really do not impact us, if that is a way that the Corps is going to recommend?
I'll say that for all the alternatives, for any widening and for the I Street diversion structure, we are looking at identifying all the impacts associated with that, hydraulic and other. And I would say what you can be doing is have your staff continue to work with us so that you can help really identify what those impacts are. It's going to be really important that we get a full sense of all the potential consequences of an action like that so that we can understand costs, implementation challenges, acceptability issues, just a timeline to get to fundamentally flood risk reduction to the city. So I'd ask that you keep doing that. That's exactly the kind of work that's underway now, is to identify that full suite of impacts.
Thank you.
I guess that's it then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very enlightening, and we'll work with you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item number 6, authorizing the general manager to execute option for the purchase of borrow material.
Chairman Denton, members of the board, good morning.
Morning.
I'm here to request that you authorize or that you approve Resolution 130101, thereby giving WSAFCA General Manager the authority to execute option agreements to purchase borrow material. As you know, over the last year, HDR has been advancing the design, and through that, you've seen task order changes which have talked about the analysis of material for the project. This particular project is going to require a significant amount of additional material. And even though the existing levee will be degraded and that material will be recycled, there's still other material that's going to be necessary. In looking at the project, it appears that our best approach would be to try to harvest local material, thereby reducing the distance that the material has to go, and also by purchasing material locally, local and state dollars would be then kept within the community. So it's the most cost-effective means to get the material. We're asking for option agreements at this time because it will help us as we move as the design moves forward to control cost, understand cost a lot better. We're not asking, each option agreement would be negotiated, for a nominal sum to secure the borrow material. We've had some informal conversations with property owners, adjacent property owners, and other property owners within Southport, so we know that there are some willing partners. We're looking for the best approach to go forward, which is mutually acceptable both for the project and for the property owners. Just, you know, these are just option agreements. When it actually came time to execute purchase for borrow materials, we would be coming back to the board for that authority.
2 million cubic yards.
That's what we're, yes.
Paul, have you looked at the possibility of getting those soils from the port?
We have. We've investigated dredgings and we've investigated port soils. In fact, we've had a conversation about that even this morning. So, yeah, good. That's all being investigated. Yeah.
Because that could really help. I mean, that could put a revenue source as far as the port is concerned, and at the same time, you don't have to truck it long ways.
Yeah, the analysis of those materials, as I understand it, is that it's not as, it's inferior to some of the other adjacent materials.
I understand, but there may be some things further south down the port, way down there. Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah, no kidding. Ken would be out in front of that gate with a jug. No,
Okay, I need a motion to accept resolution 13-01-01.
Bill, you had a request to speak?
Oh, I'm sorry. There is somebody who wants to speak. Yeah. Wilson? Just about cut you out.
President Dent, members of the board, Wilson Want again, representing SECON. I'm here to recommend that you not take this step at this time. And the reason that I'm suggesting that is based on existing CEQA and NEPA law. I'm kind of surprised that this is on the agenda because it's clear that you're going through a long environmental process under both the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Protection Act. That combination CEQA-NEPA document is under consideration by a number of agencies, including the Corps. And the third administrative draft, as is indicated in your progress report that's on the agenda tonight, is not due out until later this year. I forgot, I think it's March. At some time, that third draft will be out. So a draft hasn't even been released to the public. And it's pretty clear that under CEQA that where you have where you authorize the first step of a project that commits the agency to go through with that project, you have to have an environmental document in place. And we feel strongly that the negotiation and execution of these option agreements will be the first step in that process, and you don't have an environmental document in place. So with all due respect, we feel that you can't at this time legally approve these option agreements. And I understand that the counter is going to be their options. We don't have to exercise them. That may or may not be the case. An option is very close. It is a contract. It's a contract to purchase land or materials in this case, which can be exercised by one party. That is you. You're paying compensation for that. The staff report also points out that you've identified areas from which the borrow material will be taken. This has a whole range of effects on the analysis that will be included in the environmental document as far as mitigation measures, impacts, and it will limit the ability of the agency to modify mitigation measures, to seek borrow materials possibly from other areas. And it just simply is the kind of implementation of a project that's prohibited by both CEQA and NEPA until the environmental document is there and approved and ready to go. And you're not at that stage yet. So in conclusion, I strongly urge that you put off the execution of any of these option agreements until you've got a CEQA document in place. One other point, and I think President Denton was alluding to this, 2 million cubic yards of borrowed material we calculate to be 50 acres of property excavated to 25 feet. So it's an enormous amount of fill material. Thank you.
Do you want to ask our attorney?
Jim?
I disagree with Mr. Wentz's analysis. You're talking about very, very minor expenditure of sums to acquire options. I don't think it commits you to any particular project of any sort whatsoever. And it's also a key element to some of the feasibility analysis that needs to take place. So I think you can go forward. I disagree.
I kind of looked at this document as for the staff to go out and find this material. Before you make an EIR on it, you have to know where you're going to get it. And we're just going to look at the Southport area in various locations, and we may have to go down the river, like Tom said, or down the Deepwater Channel to gather the other. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it identifies available sources. It also would set the price at which you can acquire the material, but all at a very modest dollar expenditure. We spent more money today conducting this hearing than will be expended in acquiring the options.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? No. Well, I'm going to go ahead with this document then, based on what we've just learned. And so all those in favor of the 130101 authorizing the general manager to...
No. Let me make a motion and get somebody to second it. Just really follow the process because we got attorneys involved. I would move that the JPA adopt resolution 130101 authorizing SAFCA general manager to execute option agreements to preserve the right to purchase borrow materials.
And I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded that the recommendation action as described would go into effect. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay. Item number 7. Consideration of approval of a contract amendment with Ray Martin of the Board of Senior Consultants to support the Sacramento River Southport EIP.
Good afternoon, President Denton, Board. Just want to provide a little bit of context. The Board of Senior Consultants is our national, a board of national experts. They're required to comment on our project in order to ensure the safety of the project. So just to provide some background, for a large project like a levee improvement project that deals with public safety, the Corps of Engineers requires that you have a panel of independent experts that are accepted by the board, by the Corps of Engineers and by the state of California. So the state of California also has a requirement that you have a panel of experts. Ray Martin is one of the geotechnical engineers on our panel of experts. We have 3 experts: Ray Martin, geotechnical engineer; George Sills, geotechnical engineer; and David Williams, who looks at the hydraulics and erosion. Ray Martin has been instrumental in the work that was performed recently with respect to getting our project to a point where we're recommending minimum berms, which reduces the amount of borrow required, reduces the amount of land required, and impacts to the community. His work in that area was elevated through the Segment B value engineering, and
As such, he performed work at a higher level than was previously anticipated, and therefore we would like to get an amendment to his contract. He's provided a scope that should get us the rest of the way through the entire project, and that is what we're here to ask for your approval for today, is an amendment to his contract.
Any comment?
No questions? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd move that we approve the contract with Ray Martin in the amount of $80,000 to provide safety assurance review of the SRS EIPs supporting the West Sacramento Levee Improvement Program.
Second motion.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. It's so approved. Item number 8. Consideration of approval of Amendment Number 2 in support of Task Force Order 4 of the Design Services Contract with HDR Engineering for the Sacramento River Southport EIP.
President Denton and members of the board, I'm here today to seek request approval of Amendment Number 2 to the support, in support of the Task Order Number 4 to the Design Services Contract with HDR Engineering for the Sacramento River Southport Early Implementation Project. Back in August of 2010, WSAFCA executed a design contract with HDR to provide design services for this project. Due to the overall length of the segment and combined broad range of potential levee alignments and construction options available, development of a detailed scope for the project was challenging, and so basically we entered into an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity type of contract, which allowed development of specific task orders that the WSAFCA Board and City will review before the proceeding with the project phase and associated work. Since that contract, we've basically issued 4 task orders. Task Order 1 was basically for interim preliminary engineering. And the objective of that was to identify hydraulic impacts and environmental effects and geotechnical constraints present, an obvious advantage and disadvantage associated with setback levees, alignment alternatives selected for consideration. This was completed in January of 2011 with the delivery of the interim preliminary design report. Task Order 2 was issued to complete the final preliminary design, and that was basically to look at the alternative feasibility of the setback alternative identified in Task Order 1, comparing it with strengthen and place and adjacent levee alternatives with the intent of selecting 3 most attractive alternatives for the further evaluation during project final design. This was completed in September 2011 with the delivery of the final preliminary design report. We proceeded with Task Order 3, which is project design, which initiated investigation of hydraulic, geotechnical, geomorphic, civil design, as well as environmental studies. This basically looked at the combined elements of the setback levee that we've identified in Task Order 2, together with the strengthen and pace and adjacent alternative. 2 alternatives were basically identified, a preferred alternative and an alternate alternative, and they were developed to a 15% design and brought to the board in January of 2012. Subsequently, we issued Task Order 4, which is final design, in February of 2012, and the major components was geotechnical engineering, groundwater evaluation, civil engineering analysis, environmental documentation, and geomorphic investigation. Intent of Task Order 4 is basically to prepare contract documents, plan specification estimates to allow to bring the project to construction, including environmental documentation, the draft EIS, EIR to the draft, to the public draft, and also the required project permits. With issue of that, the board also requested that we do some additional value engineering of segments B and F to see if we can, sharpen our pencils and look at alternatives to minimize impacts to property owners, residential takes, and borrow material required. An amendment to Task Force 4 was basically issued subsequent to that to cover additional work for reviewing existing groundwater data and modeling of potential impact of cutoff walls proposed for the project. We also included some additional work for development of PS&E for the RD9 pump station, wind wave reevaluation, and borrow area drainage topography. We've done a lot of work, and as directed by WSAFCA staff, and during the design process, the board and the board of senior consultant has recommended additional works on the addition of the scope that we've done, and also we've identified additional tasks that's needed to basically prepare a complete package for the construction of this project. And we're here to request basically to incorporate those into Task Order 4 with Amendment Number 2. Attachment 1 to the staff report identifies the scope that we want, the additional scope that we want to incorporate into Task Order 4, which includes additional work in civil design, geotechnical evaluation, groundwater evaluation, geomorphic evaluation, environmental services, and of course the consultant project management work associated with that. When we issued the design contract, there was an amount of $14.43 million, with the intent of not going over that, with the issue of task orders. To date, we've basically executed task orders and associated amendments in the amount of about $12 million. This amendment would add additional $1.6 million to that, bring it to about $13.6 million, leaving the remaining contract capacity about $870,000 for remaining work to be done to complete the project design. And the remaining work that identified would be basic completion of the final environmental document once we get public comments from the public draft. Also, we would need additional services to support design during construction, and development of a multiple bid package that we anticipate needing for construction implementation. WSAFCA currently has a design funding agreement with the state that cost shares 50% of this design work that we're doing. Once the final levy alignment is identified and CEQA certification, we anticipate entering into a construction funding agreement, which would probably increase the fund share to 70% state, 30% WSAFCA. And that would basically include the design work that we've completed to date. So approval of Amendment Number 2, Task Order 4, would allow us to incorporate the additional out-of-scope work that's been completed and will be completed to complete the design of the Southport early implementation project. With that, that completes my presentation, and Michael Vecchio, HDR, is also here to answer any technical question you might have on the additional work for Amendment Number 2 to Task Order 4.
Thank you. Tom has a question.
Yeah. Talk about state cost share.
Yes.
Has the state already approved that original $14 million expenditure, or is this something that they will have to evaluate and make sure that they agree that these are pertinent costs and not overage at all? That's okay.
Yes, Tom. When we initially submitted the application for funding for design, we also included the original HDR proposal, so they have seen that information. We will likely send them over, depending on what happens here today, the staff report with the outcome from today's meeting as well, just to keep them briefed on our actions with respect to HDR's contract and the design effort. Yeah, exactly. So they've already seen the original IDIQ proposal.
If I can, just follow up a little bit on that. Under task order 1, have we had any true up on task order 1, 2, 3? Have we had any true up on any of the state funding, or does the whole project, or does everything have to be completed before they start their true up process?
So the state, with the early implementation program, realized how difficult it would be for any local agency to fund the type of improvements that would be needed. Therefore, they developed an advanced funding mechanism. So they advanced some funds to you based on what you're projecting. And Southport EIP has secured some advanced funding. It's also secured some reimbursement funding.
Okay. And we have, of course, we have a record of all that, and so that we can meet that 70% threshold.
Yeah, and the 70% will be set. That's an estimate. The 70% will be whatever that final state cost share is determined to be. Will depend on the final selected alignment after CEQA approval. So the state won't be able to execute a contract until we have CEQA approval and we have a final project footprint. And then we'll have a better idea of exactly what our cost share is, but we can do work in advance of that, and we plan on doing work with the state in advance of that, because it does take some time to provide them the information they need in order to execute that agreement. When the 65% is issued, we'll be in a very good position to begin advancing that discussion, and that is our plan.
Can we shoot for 90%?
You know what? We can shoot for 90%, but yeah, the Southport area is probably not. It's in a different condition than the north area. So,
thank you very much. Just a general comment. Some of the staff has gone out and done a real good job of looking at stability and seepage and evaluation of revised water surface elevations and stuff of that nature, which was not part of the original contract. And so we have spent a considerable amount of dollars trying to alleviate taking property away from people. That's not our goal to do that. Our goal is to provide protection for the city of West Sacramento, 44,000 people. In some cases, it's going to be hard to realize, but that's what we have to do. So with that, I will talk with Mr. Wyant.
President Denton, members of the board, again, Wilson Wendt representing SECON. HDR will be delighted to know that I'm here to support their request to modify the contract if it needs any support. I don't think it does, but I think the comment that President Denton just made underlines our concerns, and those are that one of your principles in going forward with this flood, your overriding concern is to provide protection for the city. We understand that. But one of your principal goals and precepts in doing this is to minimize the impact on private property. And we're hoping that you will expand the HDR contract even further to include instructions to them to look at the feasibility of a lesser alternative in segment F. Obviously, they would, I assume, look at that in all segments, but particularly in segment F, the segment where the SECON property is located. Our consultant's report indicates that he has found no technical information analyzing the possibility of an adjacent levee, sort of the compromise solution, instead of the in-place levee with a cutoff wall, which you indicate you don't think is technically feasible but not economically feasible. The setback levee, which does the most damage to the property, an adjacent levee with a combination of a seepage berm and a partially penetrating cutoff wall would be much less damaging to private property. And we hope that you will instruct HDR to look at those impacts, the feasibility of that sort of solution, and analyze and provide us data that we can analyze to see if that solution would work. Thank you.
I do have one other question. When something says not in the original scope, Toby, when something says not in the original scope, but it was added because of concerns from property owners, it was added because of concerns from an engineering perspective?
It's a combination of both.
Okay. So what does identification of riverbank tow rock location mean in reference to, we'll say, Sherwood Harbor or the Sacramento Yacht Club?
I think that refers to bank stabilization. You know, when we went out and did some surveys of the levees, we've noticed some erosion, and we want to do some additional analysis to determine where the tow rock is at the bottom of where we can't see. So we got to identify what additional bank stabilization work we need to do to make sure that when we complete this project, that the existing levee that's remaining is going to be, you know, it's going to be in good shape and it's not going to fail.
So that's on the water side?
Yeah, it's on the water side.
Okay. Thank you. I just sort of thought it was ironic because when you talk about Sherwood Harbor or Sacramento Yacht Club, it doesn't seem like rock location and those kinds of businesses go hand in hand. You know, they don't like the rocks.
Anything else?
Nope.
A motion to recommended action is to approve amendment number 2 to task order number 4 of the design services contract, the amount of $1,621,570, and authorize the general manager to execute item 2 to task force number 4 of the design service contract behalf of West Sacramento Area Flood Control. And I would assume that in our previous dealings with HDR, we have done something in reference to how they arrived at this figure for this total project. And if they did look at it in a different light, it's something to look into our paperwork and see if we have something of that nature. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. So ordered. West Sacramento Area Flood Control updates.
President Dent, members of the board, I'm not going to go over the entire update, but there are a few things that are a little bit different from what was distributed in your packets, such as on the Rivers EIP, the notice of completion has been signed, so that project is complete. They're still doing closeout for final construction closeout, but notice of completion has been signed. The third administrative draft to the EIS, EIR, that should go out at the end of the month. We're targeting January 25th for that. Under utility relocation for the Southport project, electronic copies of the maps have been provided to PG&E, and they have provided comments to date. For real estate services, we are looking at setting up the workshop. There's mentioned here we've got 2 dates selected right now. We're trying to finalize at the end of the month, January 30th or the 31st. We'll get that finalized probably by the end of the week. And under public relations, we're in the process of updating the flood website, and that it's going through a pretty good overhaul. That should be released over the course of the next couple of weeks. So we'll let you guys know when that's out. You can take a look at it, but it will be substantially different from the look and feel now, all with updated information and graphics and such. Under the Folsom Dam Joint Federal Project Water Control Manual Update, the next stakeholder meeting is scheduled later this month, January 24th. Staff will be attending that. And under the resources and project staffing, we did extend the recruitment for the flood protection manager to make sure that we reach all of the flood control agency websites, the agencies. We've extended that by 2 weeks, so the final filing date now for that recruitment is January 25th. And that's pretty much all I had. Unless you have any questions.
Yes, I do. I have a question in reference to the design team is investigating the financial feasibility of connecting the Village Parkway to Gregory Avenue.
Yeah, if you
would. So for the project as proposed and the 65% design, if there is extensive setback, we're looking to relocate the South River Road off of the levee and away from the flood control feature, and in doing so we'll likely try to put it in the proposed Village Parkway alignment, more closely aligned with the general plan. It's not clear. We have to work with the state. That's kind of an issue. We have to work with the state to determine what the cost share is for it. Right now we think we have a reasonable argument that we've already talked with some of the folks at the state about that basically says this: if we can build the road for less money than it would have cost to have replaced it adjacent to the levee, which would likely require potential additional relocations of homes, which we attempted to save in the segment BVE study, or less expensive than it would be to put it back on top of the levee, which in order to meet the current standard would require a much wider levee and more dirt, that they'd be willing to cost share in that, but that's going to be driven home more through the funding agreement process with the state. So we left an option that could get us to Gregory to see if we can work with the state to make that happen, and then there's another option that's maybe not quite to Gregory at Bevan Road. So we're trying to work with the state to get the connection all the way through to Gregory.
Thank you.
Last night the council approved South River Road Bridge, and I guess one of the issues is people from the neighborhood over there behind the Nugget Market. They will try to utilize that bridge as much as they possibly can without having to go to Jefferson Boulevard and then cut it. I just want to make sure that you know what our planning staff is also doing as far as South River Road goes, because if you're going to get more and more traffic on South River Road because it'll be the least resistance from a traffic perspective to get onto the freeway rather than use Jefferson. It'll be an important issue, and I think one that really needs to be addressed as far as where the South River Road is or where it goes, and the strength of that whole South River Road system, including the levees.
So we have worked with your transportation department at the city to get feedback, and Toby Wong was instrumental in helping with that.
Oh yeah, Toby, sure.
So he's well aware. Worked with Ken Jamison as well, and we're all aware that the bridge is coming in. And Ken Jamison and I actually recently met with the fire department and police department talking about the proposed alignment as well. So we're definitely trying to do our due diligence here, and the bridge came up in that conversation as well.
Super.
So
super.
Thank you. Informational items. Not. Meeting's adjourned.